At the outset of this text, we pointed out that retailing is the final movement in the progression of merchandise from producer to consumer. Many other movements occur through time and geographical space, and all of them need to be executed properly for the retailer to achieve optimum performance. In this chapter, we're going to look at the retailer's need to analyze and understand the supply chain in which it operates. After looking at the activities performed within a supply chain, we're then going to look at various types of supply chains and the benefits of each and what they offer the retailer. At the end of the chapter, we'll look at some practical suggestions to improve supply chain relationships, and especially look at the use of a category manager. Retailers cannot properly perform their roles without the assistance of other firms. Retailers are part of a supply chain, a valuable component, but not the only one. It's important to understand the retailer's role in the larger supply chain. A supply chain, which is often interchangeably used with the term channel, is a set of institutions that moves goods from the point of production to the point of consumption. However, with increased concern about the physical environment or a natural ecosystem, many retailers are beginning to view the supply chain as dirt to dirt. This broadened view incorporates not only the institutions needed to bring the product to the retailer, which is the traditional view, but also all of the materials that go into manufacturing the good and the process consumers use to dispose of or recycle the product. Over the last decade, retailers became more aware of the need to expand their view of the supply chain due to harmful ingredients found in products such as lead used in paint for children's toys or foreign substances used in pet food. Using the more traditional view, the supply chain or channel might include manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Supply chains consist of all the institutions and all the marketing activities, storage, financing, purchasing, transporting, etc., that are spread over time and geographical space throughout the marketing process. If the retailer is a member of the supply chain that collectively does the best job, that retailer will have an advantage over other retailers. It is certainly true that a power retailer can put strong demands on suppliers, but suppliers too possess great power. They know they are the only ones that have the production and distribution capacity. Innovative retailers are always seeking to find a new method to change the existing supply chain and replace it with a better one. Today, many local restaurants are buying less from food wholesalers and sourcing more products direct from local producers and farmers. This also helps them to differentiate their offerings by featuring on their menus stories about locally grown or produced food. Prior to making changes in the overall channel structure, supply chain members must understand that all channels are affected by 5 external forces: consumer behavior, competitor behavior, the socioeconomic environment, the technological environment, and the legal and ethical environment. These external forces cannot be completely controlled by the retailer or any other institution in the supply chain, but they need to be taken into account when retailers make decisions. Supply chains are clearly globally complex and rapidly changing networks of manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, and consumers. The retail strategic planning and operations management model dramatizes the importance of these external forces in retail decision-making. Supply chain or channel structure also depends on the number of tasks or functions each member is willing to perform. 8 marketing functions must be performed by a supply chain or channel. There's buying, selling, storing, transporting, sorting, financing, information gathering, and risk-taking. Most of these functions are self-explanatory. However, the concept of sorting requires some explanation. Sorting involves breaking down heterogeneous materials or products into more homogeneous groups, such as sorting oranges into those that are good for eating versus good for juice or other products. It also involves building up assortments of products that shoppers like to find together in a store. For example, orange juice with muffins, eggs, cereal, or bacon. A considerable amount of supply chain management for retailers involves storage or inventory, transportation, and sorting, which is mostly performed in the logistics network. The logistics network consists of all firms or entities throughout the supply chain that are involved in moving physical inventory from initial source to the retail store. In fact, improving the logistics network represents a considerable opportunity for retailers to improve efficiency and then lower costs and therefore increase profitability. It is not unusual for a retailer that globally sources products for over 10% and often as high as 20% of its inventory investment are associated with the time the inventory is in the logistics network and prior to delivery to where the inventory is needed. This is referred to as logistics inventory. Subtle changes in one's supply chain can have a dramatic impact on one's bottom line. Therefore, retailers must view their supply chains as extremely fragile and fraught with risk, particularly given so many retailers' supply chains are global. Often the marketing functions are highly integrated. For instance, when sourcing globally, the buying, information gathering, transporting, storage, and risk-taking functions are all intertwined. This can lead to risky and confusing decisions, as in the case of counterfeit merchandise, and especially prominent problem with designer apparel. Whether the economic system is capitalistic, socialistic, or somewhere in between, every supply chain must perform these 8 marketing functions. These functions cannot be eliminated. They can, however, be shifted or divided in differing ways among the different institutions and the consumer in the supply chain. Increasingly, when firms design supply chains, they are considering all of these marketing functions and computing a total cost of business versus just looking, for instance, if it is cheaper to manufacture in a lower cost country. Total cost of business is a concept that includes all of the direct and indirect costs of manufacturing, distributing, and marketing a product. Some of these additional costs include the risk of theft of intellectual property, additional travel for managers and executives, additional information on gathering costs and audit controls, and often additional investments tied up in inventory. As a result, many manufacturers and retailers are finding that domestic-based sourcing is increasingly competitive from a total business cost perspective. No member of the supply chain would want to or be able to perform all 8 marketing functions. So the retailer must view itself as being independent in one's abilities to make decisions, but interdependent on others in the supply chain. The institutions involved in performing the 8 marketing functions are usually broken into 2 categories: primary marketing institutions and facilitating marketing institutions. Primary marketing institutions are supply chain members that take title to the goods or services it handles or provides as they move through the marketing channel. They include manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Facilitating marketing institutions are those that do not actually take title, but assist in the marketing process by specializing in the performance of certain marketing functions. These include agents and brokers, financial institutions, market researchers, transporters, advertising agencies, warehouses, and insurers. There are 3 types of primary marketing institutions: manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Manufacturers cannot exist by only producing goods. They must also sell the goods they produce. To produce those goods, the nation's 309,000 manufacturers must purchase many raw materials, semi-finished goods, and components. In addition, manufacturers often need the assistance of other institutions in performing the 8 marketing functions. Wholesalers generally buy merchandise from manufacturers and resell to retailers, other merchants, industrial institutions, and commercial users. Today, there are 1.1 million retail stores or institutions and more than 1.8 million service establishments in the United States. Retailers can perform portions of all 8 marketing functions. Anyone that sells to the final consumer is a retailer. Dropship is a technique used in the supply chain management in which the retailer does not hold inventory, but instead transmits consumer orders and shipment details to either the manufacturer or wholesaler, who then ships the goods directly to the customer. In the case of dropship, the retailer shifts the work and responsibility for storage, transporting, and sorting, 3 of the 8 marketing functions. However, by not performing these marketing functions, it has little control over customer service. There are some bold entrepreneurs that are combining manufacturing or production along with distribution and retail functions. Many institutions facilitate the performance of the marketing functions. Most specialize in 1 or 2 functions, yet none of them takes title of the goods. So again, that's the facilitating marketing institutions. Institutions that facilitate the buying and selling functions in the supply chain or channel include agents and brokers, who are independent business people that receive a commission or fee when they are able to bring a buyer and seller together to negotiate a transaction. A new type of agent broker, known as a buyer's broker, operates within the automobile industry. Agents or brokers seldom take physical possession of the merchandise they assist in distributing, but some do, like commission merchants, who operate primarily within the agricultural industry. Retailers looking to work with an agent or broker should carefully scrutinize all possible services offered by each individual agent or broker within their line of trade, as many are increasingly performing more of the 8 marketing functions of their business customers in order to remain a relevant option for inclusion within one's future channel arrangement. Marketing communications agencies or advertising agencies also facilitate the selling process by designing effective advertisements and advertising management on where and when to place these advertisements. Institutions that facilitate the transportation function are motor, rail, and air carriers and pipeline and shipping companies. Transporters can have a significant effect on how efficiently goods move through the supply chain. These firms offer differing advantages in terms of delivery, service, and cost. Generally, the quicker the delivery, the more costly it is. However, there is usually a trade-off because faster delivery enables the supply chain to have lower warehousing costs. The major facilitating institution involved in storage is the public warehouse, which stores goods for safekeeping in return for a fee. Fees are usually based on cubic feet used per time period, like a month or a day. One type of facilitating institution that is growing in popularity with retailers is a third-party logistics provider, which is abbreviated 3PL, which is a firm that provides service to retailers and other customers of outsourced logistics services for part or all of their storage, transporting, sorting, information, and risk management functions in their marketing channel or supply chain. A variety of facilitating institutions also help provide information throughout the supply chain. Increasingly, much of this information is available to customers throughout the internet. Other facilitating institutions aid in financing, such as commercial banks, merchant banks, factors, stock and commodity exchanges, and venture capital firms. These institutions can provide or help the retailer obtain funds to finance marketing functions. Insurance firms can assume some of the risks in the channel, insuring inventories, buildings, trucks, equipment, and fixtures, and other assets for the retailer and other primary marketing institutions. They can also insure against a variety of events such as employee and customer injuries, changes in interest rates, and the impact of terroristic activity. A large part of the supply chain consists of the primary marketing institutions that perform 1 or more of the 8 marketing functions. There are actually three strategy decisions to be made when designing an efficient and competitive supply chain: supply chain length, supply chain width, and supply chain control. As shown here, supply chains can either be direct or indirect. Classification is determined by the number of primary institutions involved. A direct supply chain occurs when manufacturers sell their goods directly to the final consumer or end user. In these rare cases, the lack of involvement by other middlemen pushes the manufacturer to perform most of the marketing functions. The supply chain becomes indirect when independent members, either wholesalers or retailers, are added between the manufacturer and the consumer. The desired length is determined by many consumer-based factors, such as the size of the consumer base, geographical dispersion, behavior patterns like purchase frequency and average purchase size, and the particular needs of customers. It's important to remember that in many cases, indirect channels are actually cheaper in terms of total costs involved. The nature of the product, such as its bulk and weight, perishability, value, and technical complexity, is important in determining supply chain length. Length can also be affected by the size of the manufacturer, its financial capacity, and desire for control. In general, larger and better financed manufacturers have a greater capability to bypass intermediaries and use shorter channels. Manufacturers desiring to exercise a high degree of control over the distribution of their products are also more likely to use a shorter chain. Retailers, on the other hand, do not always have a lot of control over their channel length. Sometimes the retailer must learn to operate as efficiently as possible within an inefficient channel. Supply chain width or channel width is usually described in terms of intensive distribution, selective distribution, or exclusive distribution. Intensive distribution means that all possible retailers are used in a trade area to reach the target market. It's associated with the distribution of convenience goods, which are products that are frequently purchased, those for which the consumer is not willing to expend a great deal of effort to purchase. Selective distribution means that a moderate number of retailers are used in the trade area. It's associated with shopping goods, items for which the consumer will make a price or value comparison before purchasing. And exclusive distribution means that only one retailer is used to cover a trading area. It's identified with specialty goods, usually high prestige branded products that the consumer expressly seeks out. A pressing issue for all supply chains is who should control the supply chain. Supply chains follow one of two basic patterns: the conventional marketing channel or the vertical marketing channel. And this slide is an illustration of these major channel patterns. A conventional marketing channel is one in which each member of the supply chain is loosely aligned with the others and takes a short-term orientation. It consists of a series of pairs in which the members of each pair recognize each other, but not necessarily the other components of the supply chain. The conventional marketing channel, which is historically predominant in the United States, is a sloppy and inefficient method of conducting business. It fosters intense negotiations within each pair of institutions in the supply chain. In addition, members are unable to see the possibility of shifting or dividing the marketing functions among all the participants. It is an unproductive method for marketing goods and has been on the decline in the United States since the early 1950s. Vertical marketing channels are capital-intensive networks of several levels that are professionally managed and rely on centrally programmed systems that realize the technological, managerial, and promotional economies of long-term relationships. The basic premise of working as a system is to operate as close as possible to that elusive 100% efficiency level. This is achieved by eliminating the sub-optimization that exists in conventional channels and improving the channel's performance by working together. Because vertical channel members realize that it is impossible to offer consumers value without being a low-cost, high-efficiency supply chain, they have developed either quick response (QR) systems or efficient consumer response systems (ERC) systems. Quick response systems are integrated information production and logistical systems that obtain real-time information on consumer actions by capturing sales data at point of purchase terminals and then transmitting this information back through the entire channel to enable efficient production and distribution scheduling. There are three types of vertical marketing channels. There's corporate, contractual, and administered. Corporate vertical marketing channels typically consist of either a manufacturer that has integrated vertically forward to reach the customer, or a retailer that has integrated vertically backward to create a self-supply network. In corporate channels, it is not difficult to program the channel for productivity and profit goals, since a well-established authority structure already exists. Independent retailers that have aligned themselves in a conventional marketing channel are at a significant disadvantage when competing against a corporate vertical marketing channel. A contractual vertical marketing channel is a supply chain that uses a contract to govern the working relationship between the members. They include the following types: retailer-sponsored voluntary groups, retailer-owned cooperatives, or franchise retail programs. Each of these variations allows for a more coordinated system-wide perspective than conventional marketing channels. However, they are more difficult to manage than corporate vertical marketing channels because the authority and power structures are not well defined. Supply chain members must give up autonomy to gain economies of scale and greater market impact. The wholesaler-sponsored voluntary groups are created when a wholesaler brings together a group of independently owned retailers, anything from single mom-and-pop stores to a small chain group, grocers, for example, and offer them a coordinated merchandising program. So store design and layout, store site and location analysis, inventory management channels, accounting and bookkeeping channels, insurance services, pension plans, employee training, things like that, as well as a buying program that will provide the smaller retailers with economies similar to those obtained by their chain store rivals. In return, the independent retailers agree to concentrate their purchases with that wholesaler. It's a voluntary relationship. That is, there's no member or franchise fees. The independent retailer may terminate the relationship whenever it desires, so it is at the wholesaler's advantage to build competitive merchandise assortments and offer services that will keep the voluntary group satisfied. Retailer-owned cooperatives are wholesale operations organized and owned by retailers and are most common in hardware retailing. It should be pointed out that, in theory, wholesale sponsored groups should be easier to manage since they only have one leader, the wholesaler, versus the many owners of the retail-owned group. One would assume that the retail-owned cooperatives, individual members would desire to keep their autonomy and be less independent on their supplier partner for support and direction. In reality, however, just the opposite has been true. A possible explanation is that retailers belong to a retailer-owned co-op may make greater transaction-specific investments or investments in assets that are less likely to be applicable to or useful when working with other firms. That is, assets purchased to enhance a relationship between the retailer and the co-op suppliers are unlikely to transfer, at least entirely, to any other supplier relationship should the retailer decide to change and increase its buying from a second supplier. A franchise is a form of licensing by which the owner of a trademark, service mark, trade name, advertising symbol, or method, the franchisor, obtains distribution through affiliated dealers, the franchisees. Each franchisee is authorized by the franchisor to sell its goods or services in either a retail space or a designated geographical area. The franchise governs the method of conducting business between the two parties. Generally, a franchisee sells goods or services supplied by the franchisor or that meet the franchisor's quality standards. This relationship is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission laws. Franchising is a convenient and economic means of fulfilling an individual's desire for independence with a minimum amount of risk and investment, but maximum opportunities for success. This is possible through the utilization of a proven product or service and marketing method. Franchising permits the franchisee to select a location in a somewhat sophisticated manner based on the various professional forecasting models that use data from earlier units. Administered vertical marketing channels are similar to conventional marketing channels, yet one of the members takes the initiative to manage or administer the channel by applying the principles of effective interorganizational management, which is the management of relationships between the various organizations in the supply chain. Frequently, administered channels are initiated by manufacturers because channel members have historically relied on manufacturers' administrative expertise to coordinate the retailer's marketing efforts. Suppliers with dominant brands have predictably experienced the least difficulty in securing strong support from retailers and wholesalers. Some of the concessions manufacturers offer retailers are liberal return policies, display materials for in-store use, advertising allowances, extra time for merchandise payment, employee training programs, assistance with store layout and design, inventory maintenance, computer support, even free merchandise. If retailers want to improve their performance in conventional or administered channels, they must strategically manage their relationships with wholesalers and manufacturers. And to do so, retailers must understand and apply the three principal concepts of interorganizational management: dependency, power, and conflict. Every supply chain needs to perform 8 marketing functions, and no one firm can perform all 8 on its own and remain profitable. Even direct channels require the use of facilitating members in order to, say, transport a product to the consumer's home after purchase from the manufacturer's website. None of the respective institutions can isolate itself. Each depends on the others to do an effective job. When each party is dependent on the others, we say that they are interdependent. While this interdependency is at the root of the collaboration found in today's supply chains, it is also a major cause of the conflict found in the supply chains. To better comprehend this interdependency, an understanding of power is necessary. Power is the ability of one member to influence the behavior of the other supply chain members. The more dependent the supplier is on the retailer, the more power the retailer has over the supplier and vice versa. There are 5 types of power. There's reward power, which is based on the ability of A to provide rewards to B. There's expertise power, which is based on B's perception that A has some special knowledge or superior ability. There's referent power, which is based on B's desire to be identified or associated with A. There's coercive power, which is based on B's belief that A has the capacity to punish or harm B if B doesn't do what A wants. And there's legitimate power, which is based on A's right to influence B, or B's belief that B should accept A's influence. If the retailer accepts co-op advertising dollars, the manufacturer may control the minimum retail price, since this subject is usually covered in the agreement. Absent such an agreement, the retailer is free to set the selling price. Retailers and suppliers that use reward, expertise, referent, and informational power can foster a healthy working relationship. The use of coercive and legitimate power tends to elicit conflict and harms cooperation. Conflict is inevitable in every channel relationship because retailers and suppliers are interdependent. That is, every channel member is dependent on every other member to perform some specific task. Interdependency has been identified as the root cause of all conflict in marketing channels. There are three major sources of conflict between retailers and their suppliers. Perceptual incongruity occurs when retailer and supplier have different perceptions of reality. Goal incompatibility occurs when achieving the goals of either the supplier or the retailer would hamper the performance of the other. An example of incompatibility between retailer and supplier goals is a situation known as dual distribution. It occurs when a manufacturer sells to independent retailers while simultaneously selling directly to the final consumer through its own retail outlets or through an internet site. Retailers tend to become upset about dual distribution when two channels compete at the retail level in the same geographic area. The problem of goal incompatibility is not necessarily one of a profit versus image goal. Even if the retailer and supplier both have a return on investment goal, they can still be incompatible because what is good for the retailer's return on investment may not be good for the supplier's return on investment. Domain disagreements occur when there is a disagreement about which member of the marketing channel should make the decision. Another controversial domain disagreement practice in today's retail marketing channel occurs when retailers sell merchandise purchased from the vendor to discounters that the manufacturer does not want selling its products. A diverter is an unauthorized member of a channel who buys and sells excess merchandise to and from authorized channel members. Similar to diverting is a practice known as gray marketing, whereby genuinely branded merchandise flows through unauthorized channels that cross national boundaries. Diverting and gray marketing can lead to another supply chain problem, which is free riding. Free riding occurs when consumers seek product information and usage instructions about products, ranging from computers to home appliances, from a full-service specialty store. Then, armed with the brand's model number, consumers purchase the product from a limited service discounter or over the internet. Not all conflict in a channel is bad. Low levels of conflict will probably not affect any channel member's behavior and may not even be noticed. A moderate level of conflict might even cause the members to improve their efficiency, much the same as happens with some of your classmates when you are working on a team project. However, high levels of conflict will probably be dysfunctional to the channel and lead to inefficiencies and channel restructuring. Although all supply chains experience some degree of conflict, the dominant behavior in successful supply chains is collaboration. Collaboration, where both parties seek to solve all problems with a win-win attitude, is necessary and beneficial because of the interdependency of retailers and suppliers. Retailers and suppliers must develop a partnership if they want to deal with each other on a long-term and continuing basis. Collaboration in channel or supply chain relations is facilitated by three important types of behaviors and attitudes. There are mutual trust, two-way communication, and solidarity. Mutual trust occurs when both the retailer and its suppliers have faith that each will be truthful and fair in their dealings with each other. If mutual trust is present, both parties will tolerate inequities because they know in the long term they will be fairly treated. Without mutual trust, retail supply chains will disintegrate. On the other hand, when trust exists, it is continuous and allows the channel to grow and prosper. This occurs because of reciprocity. As conflict is inevitable in retail supply chains, two-way communication becomes the pathway for resolving disputes and allowing the channel relationship to continue. Two-way communication occurs when both retailer and supplier openly communicate their ideas, concerns, and plans. Because of the interdependency of the retailer and supplier, two-way communication is necessary to coordinate actions. Sometimes two-way communication can quickly develop into a debate where one party is trying to convince or persuade the other of its view and vice versa. More and more, suppliers and retailers are being taught to engage in dialogue versus merely debate. Communication is not independent of trust. Disputes can be resolved by good two-way communication, and this improves trust. Furthermore, trust facilitates open two-way communication. The process is circular and builds over time. Solidarity exists when a high value is placed on the relationship between a supplier and a retailer. Solidarity is an attitude and thus is hard to explicitly create. Essentially, as trust and two-way communication increases, a high degree of solidarity develops. Solidarity results in flexible dealings where adaptations are made as circumstances change. When solidarity exists, each party will come to the rescue of the other in times of trouble. Category management is the process of managing all stock keeping units, or SKUs, within a product category and involves the simultaneous management of price, shelf space, merchandise strategy, promotional efforts, and other elements of the retail mix within the category based on the firm's goals, the changing environment, and the consumer behavior. The task of category management is accomplished by members of the supply chain working as a team, not acting independently, to apply the ECR concept to an entire category of merchandise and not just a particular brand. The manager's goal is to enable the retailer to meet specific business goals such as profitability, sales volume, and inventory levels. Retailers designate a category manager from among their employees for each category sold in their store. The retailer defines specific business goals for each category. Subsequently, the category manager leverages detailed knowledge of the consumer and the consumer trends, detailed point of sales information, and specific analysis provided by each supplier to the category. In cases where the solidarity of the channel partners is high, a supplier may serve as a retailer's category manager. In this case, the chosen supplier takes on the designation of the category advisor. The category advisor works closely with the retailer buyer to ensure that the category achieves peak performance in all stores. At one point, category advisors were called category captains. While the responsibilities have not changed, retailers have adopted the new terminology as category advisors to avoid speculation and confusion about who is responsible for making decisions. The category advisors working closely with the retail buyer must make sure that the retailer has the best assortment for each store in order to achieve the greatest sales possible. This includes carrying the competition's merchandise. To survive strong competition from other retailers, advising suppliers must stay ahead of consumer trends and meet the ever-changing tastes of the consumer. Category management is now standard practice at nearly every U.S. supermarket, convenience store, mass merchant, and drug chain. Its use is growing because the results of this collaboration benefit both retailer and supplier. Retailers using category management report an increase in sales for both parties, a decrease in markdowns, better in-stock percentages on key items for the retailer, an increase in turnover rates, and a decrease in average inventory for both retailers and wholesalers, and an increase in both members' ROI and profit. However, when all retailers begin to use the same category management approach to optimize each store's layout and maximize the gross margin dollars produced per unit of space, many times stores end up looking just like their competitors. So that is all for Chapter 5. We will move on to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is about legal and ethical behavior. In this chapter, we're going to discuss how the legal and ethical environment influences a retailer's decision making. We'll also cover the legal aspects of decisions made on pricing, promotion, products or merchandise, and marketing supply chains. At the end, we're going to discuss the major ethical decisions facing retailers today. In addition to the uncontrollable external forces like the changing consumer, competition, and the supply chain environment, retailers must also monitor the legal environment. As a result, most large retailers maintain legal departments and lobbyists to keep abreast of, interpret, and even influence government regulations. The same can be said for retailers who operate in more than one country. This chapter discusses the final set of external constraints that affect retail decision-making, the legal and ethical environment. And these forces can be seen on this slide. To avoid costly blunders, the retailers need to understand the potential legal and ethical constraints within the city, state, and country in which it operates. So this slide points out that most federal laws affecting retailing seek to promote competition. This slide shows consumer protection laws. One area that is still in legislative flux is whether states can tax e-tailers or internet sales. However, over the past few years, there have been mounting pressures to start taxing e-tailers. Retailers consider a number of factors when establishing prices for the many items they sell, including market demand, internal cost pressures, and likely reactions from competitors, etc. Pricing laws also influence retailers in determining what price they should pay for a product. In making these decisions, retailers have considerable but not total flexibility. So this slide is showing you the major constraining factors. Horizontal price fixing occurs when a group of competing retailers establishes a fixed price at which to sell certain brands of products. For example, all retail grocers in a particular trade area may agree to sell eggnog at $2.49 a quart during the Christmas season, regardless of its actual or potential impact on competition or the consumer. This form of price fixing violates Section 1 of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which states every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade on commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is declared to be illegal. Another means of horizontal price fixing occurs when retailers attempt to reach agreements with one another regarding the use of double or triple coupons, rebates, or any other means of reducing price competition in the marketplace. Retailers have argued that the Sherman Act does not apply to them since they operate locally, not among the several states, the definition of interstate commerce. However, because the merchandise retailers purchase typically originates in another state, the courts view retailers as involved in interstate commerce. Vertical price fixing occurs when a retailer collaborates with the manufacturer or wholesaler to resell an item at an agreed upon price. This is also referred to as resale price maintenance or fair trade. Until recently, these arguments were considered illegal and viewed as a violation of Section 1 of the Sherman Act. Proponents acknowledge that the lack of resale price maintenance increases intra-brand competition. However, since the repeal gives retailers incentive to compete on a non-price basis, these advocates expect that inter-brand competition will increase. Price discrimination occurs when two retailers buy an identical amount of like grade and quality merchandise from the same supplier but pay different prices. However, these laws do not mean that the retailer cannot sell identical products to two different customers at different prices. These laws are meant to protect competition by making sure that the retailers are treated fairly by the suppliers. So the laws are intended to protect competitors from unfair practices by each other. Not all forms of price discrimination are illegal, however. Federal legislation addressed the legality of price discrimination in the Clayton Act, which made certain forms of price discrimination illegal. The Clayton Act, also amended and strengthened by the passage of the Robinson-Patton Act. The later act had two primary objectives: to prevent suppliers from attempting to gain an unfair advantage over their competitors by discrimination among buyers, either in price or in providing allowances and services, or to prevent buyers from using their economic power to gain discriminatory prices from suppliers as so to gain an advantage over their competition. In order for price competition to be considered illegal, it must fit into the following conditions. The transaction must occur in interstate commerce. The potential for a substantial lessening of competition must exist. In addition, the Act provides that any buyer who knowingly receives the benefit of discrimination is just as guilty as the supplier granting the discrimination. So let's break down that commodities of like, grade, and quality comment. Considerable attention has been given to this phrase. It implies that discriminatory pricing practices in the sale of advertising space or leasing of retail estate are not prohibited by this act. Like, grade, and quality have been interpreted by the courts to mean identical physical and chemical properties. This implies that different prices cannot be justified merely because the labels on the product are different. Therefore, private labeling of merchandise does not make it different from identical goods carrying the seller's brand. However, if the seller can demonstrate that an actual physical difference in grade and quality exists, then a differential in price can be justified. Buyers and sellers use a variety of defenses that enable some types of price discrimination to legally occur. So there's cost justification defense, which attempts to show that a differential in price could be accounted for on the basis of differences in cost to the seller in the manufacturer's sale and or delivery arising from differences in methods or qualities involved. The burden of such a defense is with the seller. There's the changing market condition defense, which attempts to justify a price differential based on the danger of imminent deterioration of perishable goods or on the obsolescence of seasonal goods. And then there's meeting competition in good faith defense, which attempts to show that the lower price to a purchaser was made in good faith in order to meet an equally low price of a competitor, provided that this match price did actually exist and was lawful itself. Sellers are prohibited not only from discrimination in price, but also from providing unequal services and payments to different retailers. These services and payments frequently include advertising allowances, displays, and banners to promote the goods, in-service demonstrations, distribution of samples or premiums, and credit terms. Deceptive pricing occurs when a misleading price is used to lure customers into stores. Usually there are hidden charges or an item advertised may be unavailable. The Wheeler-Lay Amendment of the Federal Trade Commission Act made illegal all unfair or deceptive acts in commerce. FTC Guide 233.1 prohibits the advertisement of any inflated former price to emphasize a price reduction, a clearance, or sale. The FTC also is concerned with the comparisons between the retailer's price and supposedly that of a competitor when the comparison price is higher than the competitor's actual price. Another concern for the FTC and state regulators is the misuse of rebates in promoting a price because the retailers and manufacturers both know that rebates give the perception of saving money. Predatory pricing exists when a retailer charges different prices in selected geographic areas in order to eliminate competition in those areas. This is a violation of the Robinson-Patton Act, which also forbids the sale of goods at lower prices in one area for the purpose of destroying competition or eliminating a competitor, or the sale of goods at reasonably low prices for such purpose. The ability of the retailer to make any promotion decision is constrained by two major pieces of federal legislation: the Federal Trade Commission Act and the Wheeler-Lay Amendment of the FTC Act. There are three promotional areas that are potentially covered by the FTC Act and the Wheeler-Lay Amendment, which retailers should be aware of. If a retailer publishes or verbalizes falsehoods about a competitor in an attempt to divert patrons from that competitor, then the retailer is engaging in an unfair trade practice. Another form of deceitful diversion of patronage that occurs in retailing is palming off. Palming off occurs when the retailer represents merchandise as being made by a firm other than the true manufacturer. Incidentally, these items are often also referred to as knockoffs. Deceptive advertising occurs when a retailer makes false or misleading advertising claims about the physical makeup of a product, the benefits to be gained by its use, or the appropriate uses for the product. It is often difficult to distinguish what is false or misleading and what is simply puffery or laudatory language, which retailers can legally use. Regardless, the concern of the FTC is whether or not the consumer was misled by the advertising. Puffery occurs when a retailer or its spokesperson states what is considered to be an opinion or a judgment about the product, not a statement of fact. When the FTC challenges any claim contained in advertising or promotional material, several requirements must be met before the Commission can find actionable deception. The FTC must prove that the challenge claim is contained in the advertisement, the claim must be deceptive, and the deceptive claim must be material. Bait and switch advertising involves promoting a product that is unrealistic at an unrealistically low price to serve as bait and then try to switch the customer to a higher priced product. Other forbidden acts or practices are refusing to show, demonstrate, or sell the product offered, disparaging by word or deed the advertised product or the guarantee credit terms, availability of service, repairs or parts, or any other respect in connection with it. Failing to have sufficient quantities of the advertised product to meet reasonable anticipated demands at all other outlets listed in the advertisement, unless the ad clearly discloses that supply is limited or available only at certain locations. Refusal to take orders for the advertised merchandise to be delivered within a reasonable period of time, and the use of a sales plan or method of compensation for salesmen designed to prevent or discourage them from selling the advertised product. There are basically two illegal deceptive sales practices: failing to be honest or omitting facts in either an ad or sales presentation, and using deceptive credit contracts. Deceptive activities essentially deal with misrepresenting the ability of a product or service to solve a consumer's problem or meet their needs. Deceptive sales practices involve not only the failure to tell the customer vital facts during the sales presentation, but also repackaging a used product and selling it as new. With regard to deceptive credit, federal laws attempt to assure a meaningful disclosure of credit terms so that the consumer will be able to compare more readily the various credit terms available to him and avoid the uninformed use of credit. While the Credit Card Act dramatically enhanced credit protection for many consumers, it also affected retailers' use of gift cards, which also grew in popularity over the last 2 decades. A retailer's major goal is to sell merchandise. In order to accomplish this goal, the retailer must assure customers that the products they purchase will not be harmful to their well-being and will meet expected performance criteria. 3 areas of law have a major effect on the products a retailer handles. Retailers are in a difficult position when it comes to product safety. Most retailers do not produce the goods they sell, but they purchase them from wholesalers or manufacturers. Retailers have little to say about product quality and safety. Their only weapon is choosing reputable suppliers so as to not carry merchandise they consider unsafe. However, even reputable suppliers can inadvertently sell products that are unsafe. According to the Consumer Product Safety Act, Retailers have always had specific responsibilities to monitor their safety of consumer products. Product liability laws invoke the foreseeability doctrine, which states that a seller of a product must attempt to foresee how a product may be misused and warn the consumer against the hazards of misuse. The courts have interpreted this doctrine to suggest that retailers must be careful in how they sell their products. Retailers are also responsible for product safety and performance under conventional warranty doctrines, which include express warranties, which are the result of interaction between the retailer and the customer, either written or verbalized, and can cover all attributes of the merchandise or only one attribute. Implied warranties include those that are not expressly made by the retailer but are based on custom norms or reasonable expectations. The two types of implied warranties are implied warranty of merchantability, which is made by every retailer when the retailer sells goods and implies that the merchandise sold is fit for ordinary purpose for which the goods are typically used. And then there's implied warranty of fitness, which implies that the merchandise is fit for a particular purpose and arises when the customer relies on the retailer to assist or make the selection of goods to serve a particular purpose. Since consumer product warranties have frequently been confusing, misleading, or frustrating to consumers, the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act was passed, which requires anyone selling products costing over $15 to give the consumer a written warranty. Retailers are restricted in the relationship and agreements they may develop with supply chain or channel partners. These can be categorized in 4 areas shown here. Territorial restrictions are attempts by a supplier, usually a manufacturer, to limit the geographical area in which a retailer may resell its merchandise. The courts view these restrictions as potential contracts in restraint of trade and in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. The law does not, however, prevent manufacturers and retailers from establishing territorial limits as long as they do not exclude all other retailers and restrict the sale of the manufacturer's products. Franchise agreements have long had territorial restrictions that provide a protected zone for the franchisee. Because of these zones, the franchisee is able to develop primary demand for the product without fear of cannibalization by another entry in the protected zone. Dual distribution occurs when a manufacturer sells to independent retailers and also through its own retail outlets. Retailers tend to become upset about dual distribution when the two supply chains compete at the retail level in the same geographic area. The courts have not viewed dual distribution arrangements as antitrust violations. In fact, they have reasoned that dual distribution can actually foster competition. They will apply a rule of reason criterion. Thus, the independent retailer suing a manufacturer for dual distribution will have to convince the court that it is competed against unfairly and damaged. Exclusive dealing arrangements can be in 2 different types. So there's one-way exclusive dealing, which occurs when the supplier agrees to give the retailer the exclusive right to merchandise the supplier's product in a particular trade area. However, the retailer does not agree to do anything in particular in return for the supplier. Two-way exclusive dealing occurs when the supplier offers the retailer the exclusive distribution of a merchandise line or product if in return the retailer will agree to do something for the manufacturer, such as heavily promote the supplier's product or not handle competing brands. Two-way agreements violate the Clayton Act if they substantially lessen competition and tend to create a monopoly. Tying agreements exist when a seller with a strong product or service forces a buyer to purchase a weak product or service in a condition for buying the strong product or service. For example, a large national manufacturer with several very highly demanded lines of merchandise may try to force the retailer to handle its entire merchandise assortment as a condition for being able to handle the more popular merchandise line. This is called a full line policy. Tying agreements have been found in violation of the Clayton, Sherman, and FTC Acts. Tying is not viewed as a violation per se, but it's generally viewed as illegal if a substantial share of commerce is affected. Several other federal laws also affect retailers, but their impact is beyond the scope of this text. As retailers seek to consolidate their operations by selling off unprofitable stores, expand into new markets, or acquire the outlets of other retailers, they must consider the impact in the competitive environment. This slide shows how state and local laws affect the retailer. Zoning laws, which protect retailers from operating at certain locations and may require that specific building and sign specifications are met. Unfair trade practices, which seek to prevent one retailer from gaining an unfair advantage over another retailer. Building safety laws for construction, fire, elevator, smoking, parking, and other codes. There's blue laws, there's franchise laws, which seek to protect franchisees in their states. There's taxing laws and safety practices. Consumers may consult their local Better Business Bureau, the National Retail Federation, state and local retail trade associations, or state and local regulatory agencies. With regard to unfair trade practices, most states have established their own set of laws that prevent one retailer from gaining an unfair advantage over another retailer. As a general rule, unfair trade practice laws regulate retailers' competitive behavior. So let's talk about ethics. Ethics is a set of rules for moral human behavior. These rules or standards of moral responsibility take the form of do's and don'ts. Some retailers have an explicit code of ethics, which is a written policy that states what is ethical and what is unethical behavior. Most often, an implicit code of ethics, which is an unwritten but well understood set of rules or standards of moral responsibility, exists. The implicit code is learned as employees become socialized into the organization and the corporate culture of the retailer. There are 3 decision areas where ethical considerations are especially needed in retailing: buying merchandise, selling merchandise, and the retailer-employee relationships. When buying merchandise, the retailer can face at least 5 ethical dilemmas. Product quality. So should a retailer inspect merchandise for product quality or leave that to the customer? Although the law does not require such inspections, most retail buyers want to ensure that their merchandise meets the expectations of the store's customers. Sourcing. Should a retailer verify the source of the merchandise? The only way U.S. retailers can be sure that they're not buying illegal merchandise is to inspect all suppliers down to the smallest subcontractors. However, some retailers are also having troubles with American suppliers. A program of careful vigilance to overcome such activities can be expensive, and it's doubtful whether American consumers should be willing to bear the cost. Sustainability. Should a retailer be concerned with the natural resources that are used by its supplier in manufacturing and distribution? Should they actively encourage or even require suppliers to engage in sustainable business practices? Well-known and highly recognized brands have not only been encouraged by retailers such as Walmart, but also its customers to follow sustainable methods of manufacturing. Slotting fees or slotting allowances. Should a retailer accept money from a manufacturer for agreeing to add a new product to its inventory? Slotting fees are fees paid by a vendor for space or slot on the retailer's shelves, as well as for having a slot in the retailer's computer systems for its UPC number. Bribery. Should a retailer or its employees be allowed to accept a bribe? Bribery occurs when a retail buyer is offered an inducement, which the Internal Revenue Service considers to be a value greater than $25, for purchasing a vendor's product. A modern version of bribery occurs when retailers shake down vendors for markdown money. Markdown money is the fund that retailers arbitrarily deduct from the vendor's payments when the merchandise doesn't sell briskly enough. Ethics can also influence the retailer's selling process in two ways: products sold and selling practices. So for products sold, should a retailer be allowed to sell any product as long as it's not illegal? For selling practices, should a salesperson, while not saying anything wrong, be allowed to not tell the customer all the facts? Many retailers have ethical standards against such practices. However, as long as salespeople are paid on commission, we can expect such behavior to occur. Some highly successful retailers, such as Home Depot and Best Buy, have sought to overcome this dilemma by never putting their employees at odds with their own codes of ethics. Ethical standards can also influence the retailer-employee relationship in three ways: misuse of company assets, job switching, and employee theft. Misuse of company assets, you want to think about, is an employee allowed to use company assets, such as taking a break or using the phone for personal use, even if such actions may not be illegal? For job switching, does an employee have the right to work for whomever they want? What responsibilities do they have to their previous employer who provided them with training and access to confidential information, such as vendor costs, customer lists, and future plans? At the same time, the retailers should not seek to replace an older employee with a lower paid younger employee. And then employee theft. Just as employers have a responsibility to be fair to their employees, employees must do likewise. However, many workers admit to stealing from their employers. Employee theft or shrinkage is most prevalent in food stores, department stores, and discount stores, all stores which are large in size, sales volume, and number of employees. So that's it for Chapter 6. If you have any questions, as always, please reach out to me. I'm here to answer questions and here to help.